If you're a bank, you want to know what's happening. When you're on the end user side, you want to have a guarantee that your password manager doesn't know what you're doing. So you can see already that.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Techlore Talks. Today, I have the privilege of having Remy on from Passbolt. That is an open source password manager that has a quite similar philosophy to KeePass in many ways. And we talk a lot about unsophisticated phishing attacks that target individuals through deceptive emails. We also touch on the implications of credential theft. We talk pretty much everything about password managers, what makes them more secure for most people than regular things, and also very commonly asked questions like, should you use TOTP or 2FA along with your password manager, and many other things. So now let's dive into the interview.
Thanks for coming on Techlore Talks, Remy. Do you want to start by just introducing yourself and what you work on?
Sure. Thanks for having me today. I'm Remy Berthaud. I'm co-founder of Passbolt. So I'm software engineer by trade and training. And I've been working on basically Passbolt, which is a open source password manager designed for collaboration for about 10 years. So this is actually our 10 years in 2016 since launch. So
very nice. And when I first learned about Passbolt, first off, it's really cool you guys are open source. What's kind of the target demo historically, and is that still the target demo you're chasing today with Passbolt? Like, what are kind of the unique things about Passbolt for someone who hasn't heard of it before?
So when we started a long time back, there were no like a web-based password manager, and like actually was there was this infamous article like JavaScript cryptography considered harmful, and all these things. It was very nascent, like the idea of having a password manager in the browser, and what was available at that time was really solutions like KeePass that was already around. So it was like client is basically one file that you have and you decrypt locally, and it's very safe that way. What was missing for us, because we were basically making software, we were a software house, and we were having these needs of sharing credentials and being able to track and audit credentials, so that, for example, when somebody's leaving the company, we can see who had access to what and rotate the credentials. So it started from that need that we had. And my co-founder, Kevin, like created like a very early version that we use internally. And then like from them, we started like onboarding some clients. And then eventually like we were convinced that, this solution was interesting. So we didn't want to build like another personal password manager. We skipped that step. We went directly into like, okay, let's build a password manager for businesses that would meet our requirements. So there are some security requirements that were important for us, and there were also some functionalities that were important for us. That basically became the DNA of Passbolt. So things like sharing items on a one-on-one basis. So as opposed to KeePass, for example, you have all your credentials in one file, or like some other personal password manager where you have like collections of credentials. So every time you share, you basically share a collection. So you share all the credentials that are in that collection. There is no granular, fine grain, okay, this person can read this password but cannot change it. Or the same goes for audit log. Every time you basically access credentials, you download the entire collection, and then there's no fine grain tracking of who has access to what. So you can report back, the client can say, hey, I've accessed that credential, and that's fine for most usage, but you don't really know if that credential was actually leaked from the client or like. And the way we did it for Passbolt is that we only download the secret when you use it. So this way, even if a secret, let's say, is shared with you, if you don't use it, meaning like you never fill it in a form, we have the proof that you never actually downloaded it. So yeah, that's so you see, there are like some collaboration, there are some security requirements that were important for us. Like another one is a lot of credentials manager, they use a user generated passphrase or password as the main encryption key. And we know that letting people select the basis for their cryptographic keys is generally not a good idea. What you want is like something that is truly random and something that people cannot remember. And so that's why we introduced that concept of having like a private key that is used to basically decrypt a secret. So other password managers would generate that key by doing iteration, like a public key a private key derivation function, and they will apply some rounds so that it's hard to brute force, but it's still something that is user generated. So it can still be phished, it can still be, brute force, for example, on the login form. And that's what we wanted to avoid. So obviously it creates some friction with usability. So it's not ideal that people, have to have this private key. And if they lose this private key, then if they remember the passphrase to unlock the private key, they cannot, access the solution unless they have shared that private key with a trusted party. There are different type of security requirements. So yeah, that's really like the DNA of the solution. I don't know if I'm talking like if it's clear or not.
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a lot there, and I've been taking notes so we can kind of deep dive into some of these things.
Yeah.
So I want to start by just maybe covering the basics of a password manager. And
Yeah.
so to this day, would you say you're still more enterprise focused than end users?
Yes, definitely. Because of these security requirements, it's like when you're on the end user side, like for personal usage, you want less friction, and it's okay to have trade-off when it comes to security. You would want to have like maybe more privacy than say if you're in an enterprise space. Because if you're a bank, you want to know what's happening with the credential. When you're like a credential manager and you're serving like individuals, you want to have a guarantee as an individual that your password manager doesn't know what you're doing. So you can see already that even though it's password manager, there are very conflicting requirements, whether you're coming from business or whether you're coming from the personal space. And so we choose like to go that side instead of trying to do everything, because it's really hard to do everything.
And so what are the kind of what's a typical customer before we deep dive into some more of this stuff? Is it small businesses, big businesses, governments? Who do you see getting the most value out of something like this?
Like it applies to a lot of businesses, but the sweet spot for us is people that are, I would say, interested in the security posture that we are proposing, as well as things like the ability to self-host, or that have a need to organize credential at like very granular level with fine-grained permissions. And so these tends to be organizations that are small or large, but that are privacy conscious, or like that have certain appetite for fixing some of this risk or fixing some of the issues that I talked about.
Yeah, and so, let's say I'm a business owner, right? Like I have various options to choose from. There's just not using a password manager and kind of just hoping for the best in the world.
Yeah.
I think most of our audience might know the issues with that, but maybe we can still touch on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's maybe going with a more mainstream enterprise solution. I'm thinking, I believe like Nord, who has NordVPN, is run
Yep.
by NordSec, who has been moving in a more enterprise direction, and they have more of those tools now. And then we have like probably 1Password, Bitwarden, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have kind of you guys who also allow the ability to self-host and all these things. So what are kind of the general pros and cons of these different approaches if you were to kind of break down why someone might go for a specific one and how you guys position yourself in kind of that space?
Yes. So it's, and also we are not the end all of, so if your organization is super mature and very advanced, we might not be a right fit for you. So I was not trying to present us as, okay, we are the most, secure or most mature. It's just like to explain like a little bit where we position ourselves. Like you have personal credential manager, like typically the one built in your OS or your browser. And if you're a small business owner, this is perfectly acceptable way of handling your credential. It's better than nothing, and it's actually way better than nothing. It's a proper solution. And then you have like, if you want to start having like a little bit of collaboration, but your team is small and you don't have like very complex requirements, and you also want to be more on the, I want a low friction, low barrier of entry, and I'm okay to accept these risks that come with that low friction, then you can go for solutions that have came from that personal space and that have developed business solutions. And then if you evolve and you want to use it as a beginning of doing access privilege management, and you want to have like more fine-grained tuning of who can access what, make sure that there's least privilege enforced at your organization, then you can start like going for a solution like Passbolt. And then after that, you will, go into more complex PAM solutions and all that if you like really large enterprise with a lot of use cases.
And why, because I feel like if someone's starting a business, you get like a how to start a business book, you go to business school. Business school is interesting because I feel like part of the point of business is to insert something new into the market. And it's kind of hard to get that from something like school. It's a whole side tangent and it's weird, but my point is there's no like right way to do business. And
Yeah.
if you try to go through traditional resources, password management and security isn't really a part of that discussion for a company. So what are kind of the attacks that you guys see? And how might, yes, a password manager help in these attacks, but why should someone even care in the first place if they're just trying to get their business done, they want to get a product out there? Why should they put any attention to the security stuff?
Most of the attacks and like the scenarios that are covered by a password manager are like unsophisticated attacks. So typically it would be like things like phishing. Like, so basically you receive a link that looks like a legitimate email, you go to an app that looks like the login app and you just log in that because you're tired and you have 10,000 things to do. You don't really check the emails, the URL. The URL look alike, but you don't pay attention and boom, basically like you got phished and that person have access to the credential for that site. So let's say you don't have 2FA in place for that service, then it starts becoming complicated and you'll have to deal with that breach. That's one issue. Another issue is that if people don't use anything, they will tend to reuse predictable passwords or like reuse the same everywhere. So typically, the name of the service at the year that they sign up for the service, or like come up with this like what they think are like very clever combinations, but that have been analyzed for years by attackers using like breach data. What you want is to protect yourself from these basics sort of attack. Like it's just normal hygiene, the same way like you clean your hand, so that you don't get disease. This is kind of like an automated thing that you should be doing at that stage, because if you don't do it, it's gonna happen to you for sure. And so password managers, they really help you with this. So for example, you go on a site, it will suggest, hey, do you want to fill that credential for that site? With Passbolt, for example, if that URL do not match the entry that you have in the Passbolt database, it will not suggest it. So you will already feel that there is something fishy, because like you'll be like, how come Passbolt is not suggesting the credential for that site? And it will give you like some hint. And then it will generate passwords for you. So it will generate like truly random and strong passwords that you don't even have to type anymore. If you are a business owner, like you should definitely do this. And like, for example, even in your family, if you have maybe like people that are a little bit older, they are not doing that yet, it's very easy now to like roll them out. Even just like if they are using an iPhone, then like just set them up with the basic password manager on an iPhone. It's really important that people get up to speed with this, because it just makes their life easier as well.
Yeah. I want to ask about your guys' business model, because you're open source, and always important to ask how open source projects make money.
Yes.
My understanding is that you offer to, like if I'm an organization and I want to get going on a password manager that's got good security, has good permissioning, gives me the stuff, I can roll that over in-house and I can self-host it, and then you guys theoretically get nothing from that, from what I understand, but maybe I'm wrong, because that's just my idea.
Correct.
And then you probably offer a like managed solution. So do you want to kind of break this down for me?
Yeah. So we have 3 versions of Passbolt. You have like the community edition, which is free as in freedom and free beer. So like basically you can get started. We have like packages for all major Linux distribution, and you self-host. And then you have Passbolt Pro edition, which is like the same similar code base than Passbolt Community Edition with some additional plugins, and that requires a subscription. Like, so you will be prompted to enter a subscription key when you use it. So the software is free as in freedom, but not as in free beer. So it's an important distinction. So there is a price attached to it. And then we have the latest option, which is cloud. So we host it for you. So it's basically Passbolt Pro, but hosted by us. And we have some other options. So for example, if you are a bank and you work in like regulated environment, we also work with other partners to, provide you with a fully managed solution that match your legal requirements. So for example, if you want like bank approved hosting environment of Passbolt managed with like 24/7 support, then we do that through partners.
So what's someone missing if they just download the free community edition and they just start using that?
So they will have access to most of the functionalities, so sharing groups. So what will be missing is the productivity features such as policies. Like I want to enforce certain policy on the application, like my password needs to be like this, or users are required to sign up for MFA, or I want to have them place their private key in escrow with me so that like I can decrypt their content in case they leave the organization or they lose access to their stuff. So for example, these kind of requirements, they come from more larger organization that have like requirements that come from their local law or like their like the way they operate, and so they will have access to things like LDAP sync or like these kind of features that if you're like 20 users, it's okay to invite everybody manually, but if you have like 500 users, you're not going to want to do that manually. So these are the functionalities like productivity for the administrator that are part of the paid version. So this is pretty much how we make the distinction between what goes into the community edition and the pro edition.
Got it. And so this is obviously for larger companies, and for us internally, we're just going to use something simple, like you were saying earlier,
Yeah.
because we're very small. But what kind of organizations are going to be self-hosting this on their own
Yeah.
versus just paying you guys to host it for them? Do you find that like really big companies want to self-host it, or do the really big companies want to outsource it? Or is it the
Yes.
inverse? Or is it kind of just depending on the company?
This is where it gets interesting, is like 75% of our customers are using the self-hosted version, which is like not what you would see in other businesses. And I know that there have been like a big move for people to go to the cloud, but we like basically someone else's computer, and we are seeing like now this reverse trend. So
Do you think it's because of like global politics and digital sovereignty, or?
partly because of that, but even before like world leaders starting being a little bit more erratic, there was there was already some concern around like trusting cloud providers with the crown jewels. So let's say you're like a government, do you trust an American company, or do you trust even like a Luxembourg company to like to host your most important secret? And so for a solution like Passbolt, it makes sense that this is one of the few things you want to self-host. Like your encryption key, your passwords, like they become like really like something people value. And now this trend we've seen have accelerated. So we see like even like medium-sized company are also interested in this, and we have a lot of small businesses that start with self-hosted, and then they realize that it's too much work for them, and then they want to move to Passbolt Cloud, for example. So this we've seen like all sorts of trends there, and governments for sure they want to self-host, but also like large organization, industries that work in sensitive things like energy sector also is like they use solutions that are not connected to the internet because it's critical infrastructure. They have their own network. Their network is not connected to the internet. So then it makes sense that a solution like Passbolt is something that you want to use. You also have like small businesses. I don't know, like it becomes like a cultural thing. Like for example, in Germany, people are more privacy conscious than say other places, and so they would prefer, if they have the choice, if they have the option and the option is good, they will choose that option.
Got it. And a pattern I've noticed, and maybe this is changing, and maybe it's a generalization that's not accurate, but I hear a lot about how the execs in the boardrooms, they're more likely almost a lot of times to go for a technology that is being sold to them as some proprietary, flashy, black box technology. Only we have the ability to do this, and we keep it, we offer you this exclusive service, proprietary. I feel like proprietary technology for end users is seen as almost a negative thing, but for some businesses, it's seen as a positive thing, or at least more neutral. So how do you kind of approach that as an open source organization? Do you think that's a positive? Do you think some businesses see it as a negative almost? Are they like, well, does that mean it's less secure? Does that mean that this isn't as good as it could be? Is this kind of a friction point? Because I could see it potentially being a friction point, or maybe I'm just making things up.
I think there's a cultural component to it. Like, so some organization may not have this culture and it's complicated, and we have a fit where with organization that believe that openness is required for security. So if they believe the opposite, I don't see them because they don't come to us. So I see people that are enthusiastic about the thing being open, and I think on the long term people see the advantages of it. Like, for example, when we do audits, and we do audits several times per year, then people can see the fixes. They can see if we do the fixes or not, or how much time it takes to do the fixes. And we published our audits and our reports like unchanged, so people can actually see what we are prioritizing, and like this transparency goes beyond the code itself. Because if I give you the code and the code is just like mangled in a way that is not human digestible, or if nobody's looking at it, then like what's the point of it being open? So there is also the component of making it this accessible to people so that they can make the right choices and understand, okay, this security risk is covered, this security risk is not covered. And they don't have so much this option with closed source software, because they don't know, like, okay, what were the arbitration done, like did they choose to place the cursor more on usability or more on security, or like did they manage to find a new technique that solve it for both? And you don't see that. So you just have to take their word for it. Now I can see more and more people doing their homework, and they want to see, like, okay, explain to me how it works, and like tell me about the risks, and like tell me about the risk that you're not covering.
Got it. So I'm going to pivot now a bit more into kind of features and overall the usability and what that looks like. And then we can do a quick security deep dive. And then I have a few personal questions for you. I wanted to start by asking, because you guys seem to be like a very dedicated solution. You are offering password management to predominantly organizations, but also to the community as well. There's this trend that I see a lot, especially with like more proprietary oriented companies. I don't mind using, because there's not necessarily a negative aspect to this necessarily. I think like NordSec is a good example of this, where they're trying to build a whole suite. Like there's the password manager, there's the VPN, there's I think they have data removal at this point. This is for their end user, but then their enterprise product I think also has a lot in it. Do you see this as a disadvantage for you guys? Like, are you looking to expand Passbolt to be a bit more than just a password manager, or do you think that just a narrow focus to just do that one thing is kind of the right approach for you guys?
I think it depends on how much resources you have. So, like, I'll be frank. Like, we are like 50 people. So, and we have not raised like in hundreds of millions in capital. So obviously we cannot compete everywhere. So we have to choose like where we want to be good at. And it's a very competitive landscape. So like if you want to stay competitive, you cannot just do 20 things poorly. You need to be good at something. So that's the way we are approaching it. So we are still working on like improving the product to the point where like we are satisfied with like where we are. But we still plan to support like more use cases that are like related to credential management. And there's quite a bit. So like our goal is to keep doing what the users are requesting. And I don't think they will stop asking for things at any point. But we try to have this feedback loop of like building what people are asking for. And since we are not, building extremely fast, then we get to see on the long term what are the trends and like what's important for people, what is recurring, what is coming from the customer, what is coming from the community, what is coming internally on what people want to work on, and like yeah.
And so what are some of like the requested features that you guys get that are the most frequent?
A lot of the things that we just like delivered. So like recently they were we did like a major revamp of the architecture with Passbolt v5, and now we are able to add some new resource types. So our goal is for people to be able to create multiple resource types and be able to compose different type of credentials. For example, a password with a TOTP, or a secure note with a list of custom fields. And so we try to continue going in that direction, like having secure notes, having like all sorts of properties that people can add to credential and compose them. And so we will continue going in that direction for some time. People are asking a lot, for example, about file attachment, but you don't want to become like a drive. So it's kind of like a fine line. They are like,
That's a whole nother
okay.
ball game.
Yes, it's a very different, like storage of credential and storage of file is like totally different beast. So we have to like be careful on how we approach these things so that they have the right expectations also on like, okay, you want to attach a certificate? Yeah, that's fine. You want to attach a movie? Maybe not.
So do you guys support integrations? I know this is more of, it's funny, this is definitely more of an end user, regular consumer feature, but I actually think it's very useful for business, and maybe I think it's going to catch up to the business world eventually, but aliasing services for emails. So that
Yes.
way, yeah, is that something you guys support or?
So typically this is something like which I believe falls in the realm of personal password management. It's what I was saying at the beginning, like you want full privacy and you don't want the service to know about what is your username. In the enterprise world, you want to know which username people are using. I don't want to see the logs of in my security operation center of like random emails and not being able to link them to actual users. So it doesn't like these two things are like maybe there are some scenario in enterprise where you would want that, but like most of the time not so much. Like people are more interested in like having integration with CM, for example. Can you send me alerts in real time about like so that I can analyze behaviors and link them to other behaviors that are happening on other services? They are more interested in these kind of scenarios than, okay, can you make my users anonymous? It's more like the other way around. They want to like praise them, like to understand behavior and see like if there are patterns that don't make sense.
Got it. And how have you seen adoption for things like passkeys in the enterprise world? Are they embraced? Are they seen as not good?
So the passkey is pretty vast subject, and it's one credential that I believe like have a lot of like this is basically the future, and like this will happen. The speed at which it will happen is like will it be like IPv6 or I don't know. They might take a while, but I can see people are like intrigued, and this is one of the top things that people have requested for Passbolt, and this is one of the things we are committed on working on. We are actually part of the FIDO Alliance, so we are like seeing like how is the the RFC evolving, and like how does it like integrate in the browser, for example. How can we exchange passkeys between like credential managers? And our strategy has been to wait a little bit until the dust settle when it comes to specification, because there's the specification and there's the implementation by Google, Microsoft, and all that, and that becomes the standard. So it's like you want to see like, okay, out of the whole standard, like which part is actually the standard. So we were kind of like waiting a little bit to see like, okay, where are we like on that front? And now we are like, for example, the mobile experience I think is pretty much there. The browser experience is still a bit like depends on the browser and depend on the OS. And so for me, it's not ideal that you have like an experience that shifts so much that if you use Edge or Chrome, then you're gonna have a different experience. I don't think that's good for the end user, especially with new technology. But I think it's gonna go there at some point that there will be like a more unified
Is that because
perception.
of Manifest v3 by any chance?
Manifest v3 no is a separate topic. Manifest v3 is more like the underlying format for Chrome extensions.
Got it. So that doesn't influence your ability to develop.
No.
Okay, cool.
So the way the browser works at the moment when you do like passkeys, it uses some API like the credential API. And that then talks to your browser, and so if your browser extension, you can like basically replace that JavaScript API with your own stuff that will talk to the extension. But if there are several providers and they are all doing that, then it becomes like not clear who's hijacking the most the credential API, and you would want to have like some form of like agreement that if several people want to do that, then this is how you do it, so that for the user it's clear. Let's say I'm using Dashlane and Passbolt. So Dashlane for personal use and Passbolt in my company. And I have passkeys for Gmail, like my personal one in Dashlane, my professional one in Passbolt. You want us to play nice with each other. Basically,
Right.
we're like, okay, do you want to use which one, and not like
Yeah.
be like, okay, I nuke Dashlane out of existence and like, and you only use mine. And the OS level, they will like sometimes they are a bit brutal like that. They're like, okay, we're Google, it's a Chrome browser, so you want to use our stuff.
I think there needs to inevitably be some way to select and disable passkey options on devices, because right now it happens with me. If I figured out some workarounds, but if I'm going into a website, I use Proton Pass as the extension, right? And then it's like, oh, login. I accidentally, I don't use passkeys too often, actually. I normally use passwords and I use my YubiKey, but I don't use proper passkeys. And it'll be like, oh, login, but I'll accidentally click the passkey button this time around. And then Proton Pass comes out and it's like, oh, no passkey found. And I say, oh, ignore. And then the Brave browser automatically comes up next and it says, oh, no passkey found. And I click, ah, shoot, and I click cancel. And then like the OS comes up and it goes, oh, no passkey found. And I click cancel. So there's like 3 people who get pinged to see if they have a passkey. And I think that's kind of
That's the
like
problem I'm talking
demonstrating.
about. Yes.
Exactly. So it's frustrating. And I think that'll be figured out over time. So it's good you guys are thinking about that.
Like in FIDO Alliance, I think it's a big topic, and like the thing is like people will have different views on that, so you need to find consensus and all that. But I think it would definitely get better. It's already getting better since like last 3 years. Like at the beginning there was like the UX was changing also a lot because they were learning, and so it's also complicated for users. Like if every time you log in with a passkey, the experience changes because you're fixing it at the same time. It's also like confusing. So
And so with the passkeys, do you think that's a good microcosm for just your overall approach? Because most, Proton Pass, Bitwarden, all these mainstream password managers aimed at consumers, passkeys is like a priority one thing. Like this is a new technology, people expect it from us, and they rush it out, and it's well received by the community. You guys are like, okay, this is way too early. Like we need to wait. We need to see. We need to make sure we do it right. So do you think that there is a speed difference in terms of features because of the different clientele that you're serving?
yes, and also like resources. It's like to be completely transparent. Like it's what I was saying. Like you have like companies in the US that raise like in several hundreds of millions. Obviously, they're gonna get it out of the door faster than us, and that's all right. That's part of like being the first mover or not. And well, we are like we're still participating. We're still looking at what's happening, and our goal is just like our advantage is basically being the last to do it. We can like take the good parts, see how people have done it, and see like which part works well. So we have this advantage of not having to maintain things that like have not worked. So there's like a disadvantage, but also there are some advantages to that.
Got it. And then do you guys support TOTP natively in your password
Yes.
manager?
Yes.
Got it. And what are kind of, if an organization, starts using you guys, they might inevitably ask, oh, should we be using TOTP within your app? Is that safe enough? Or should we be using a dedicated solution? Do you guys offer a dedicated solution, or do you have something else you can recommend them if they want even more security with that separation?
So the good answer is it depends. I would say like I've answered that question like pretty extensively like on the community forum because it comes back every now and again. It really depends on what is your posture, like your risk scenarios, and like what is important for you or not. As opposed to not doing any MFA, storing them in Passbolt, is it better? Yes. Like so it really depends where you're coming from and where you're going, and like what's your threat model. I would say it's probably not ideal if you're in a high risk scenario. What I would recommend typically is that you have your second factor authenticator in a separate device. So it's the same if your password manager is on the same device but on another app. Is this still better? I don't know. if you can compromise the OS, for example, you can compromise both. Is that like a scenario that you care about? Or are you like, okay, no, I only care if one of the app get compromised, and then that's basically my scenario. But if you care, for example, OS level stuff, then like you would need like completely separate device. So I'm trying to give you a clear answer, but you see, like it really depends what you want to do. Like,
yeah, I was just curious if maybe like the way of looking at it from an organizational, like an organization's perspective is different.
If you have, for example, like a shared second factor authentication, then it makes sense, because then you like, it's the same if I give you a QR code, you know, we both scan the same QR code and we both have it on TOTP app. Let's say you leave the organization, I need to remember to change that that code because I shared it with you. But if you use Passbolt, then Passbolt will tell you, okay, that person left, and you need to replace that code. It will directly be built in the interface.
And how do you ensure, because like what's stopping someone from still recovering the seed encryption key for the, I don't know if it's technically encryption, but like what's stopping them from recovering the seed and just importing it into their own 2FA app?
But they can do that. So that's why you need to rotate it. So that I'm talking about.
So you still need to rotate it even if you kept
Yes.
TOTP in Passbolt.
Yes.
Does Passbolt like automatically notify you as someone who's managing that? Like, oh, they left. Hey, you need to reset the TOTP for this.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. So do you kind of like handhold a little bit for organizations so that they can pick up on those habits if they don't know to do them?
Yeah, the way it will be signaled in the interface. It will be like a little warning, and it'll be like, so like generally ideally you would not have like 50 warnings. So if there is a new warning, they will see it, they will click, they will be like, okay, you need to change, you know. So it's pretty straightforward.
And do you guys integrate with things like have I been pwned? Like, do you scan?
Yes, we do that as well. Yeah.
Cool.
So when you create a credential, it's like, basically the goal for us is like you don't enter credentials. It's like you only have a random generated key, and you have like a passphrase to encrypt this locally on your machine, and that's it. And then the rest is just like credentials that are completely random. But if by some changes you need to have like something that is manually generated, then we would also check like whether it was part of a breach or not.
Got it. Perfect segue, because my next more technical question was going to be this 2 different keys essentially to get in. So this might be different. So I'm saying this to kind of open it up for you to correct my understanding of this. Totally fine. With like Proton Mail, by default, when you use Proton Mail, it's just a username and password, kind of like any other account out there. And they essentially, because it's end-to-end encrypted and they're not supposed to get access to the data, they derive an encryption key based on the password you choose. So it's really important to use a strong password, because that's the password to get into your account, and it's the password that's encrypting your data. It's 2 different things. You're saying you guys are essentially offering Proton's like 2-password mode. Because with Proton, you can enable something called 2-password mode, where you have an account login, but then you still need to type in a second password to essentially decrypt your data. Is that essentially what you guys are doing as well, or is it different?
I'm not 100% sure how Proton works, but my understanding is that when you type your password, it's actually the password that is used to decrypt the private key. So they basically derive it 2 times. They derive one for login and one to decrypt the private key that they download once you manage to log in. So there are actually 2 separate credentials, one that is used for login and one that is used to download the private key and decrypt it. And so from what you're saying, I'm thinking like maybe they split, and like you would have one for authentication and one to decrypt your private key, so that it's not the same one that is used for authentication. So this way, like it cannot be phished. The way Passbolt works is a little bit different. So your key is not stored server side; it stays only on your machine. So we don't store a copy on the server and you log in and you get that key. It's basically it's there on your device, and you type your passphrase, is basically decrypts the private key.
So it's like local database encryption, essentially.
Yeah.
So,
and then we use that key to produce cryptographic signature, and that cryptographic signature is used to authenticate. So it's not like a password that we send to the server and the server check whether it matches. It's very similar to passkeys. It's not the same protocol, so it's not FIDO Alliance protocol. It's something that is specific to Passbolt, but it's still based on like cryptographic challenges and signatures. So it's more strong. So each authentication attempt is unique, and you cannot phish this.
Wow, that's really cool. Do any other password managers do this that you know of?
I know that 1Password is using like a private key. So they have like this like they call it a recovery code, but it's basically like they use this to create the final key that is used for authentication and for decryption. And so it adds quite a bit of entropy as opposed to just like, like for example, Bitwarden is using like just a key derivation function from the password that is user generated. So LastPass was doing this as well. And the issue with LastPass is that because they were like very old account, the key derivation function uses a cost parameter, and that cost was for 10 years back. So the cost didn't catch up with what modern computer could do. So we don't want to have these sets of problems, to have to, recreate that key and change the parameters and re-encrypt everything because that key is changing because we are increasing the strength. We wanted to have like something like completely random, like 1Password. The way we're doing it compared to 1Password is a little bit different because for ours is based on OpenPGP, which is an open standard, and they have developed their own thing. So, but in practice, I think we are the only two password manager that use like a random private key.
Definitely the only one that's doing it transparently, because 1Password isn't open source. You guys are open source, and it sounds like you're also using OpenPGP, which is.
But I think there are some other credential manager that use, like for example, passkeys, and they store like encryption key as part of the passkeys. So for example, I know at least two password managers that do this. So they use like something that is called a PRF extension. They basically store cryptographic materials inside the passkeys. So when you successfully log in, it gives you like basically this private key that can be like truly random, and then they build on that. Yeah, it's different techniques, but like same kind of goals.
Got it. And kind of the final way I wanted to finish out this interview was just kind of talking about yourself. I wanted to ask kind of what your favorite password manager is for yourself and kind of the people in your life, if you're not going to recommend Passbolt to them. So like, how is Passbolt's community version for just regular people? And then how does that compare to maybe other options that people have?
Yeah. So I would say like I'm pretty. If I recommend the competition, it's gonna be complicated. So like like I would say Passbolt, like I really like it. Like I use it on a daily basis, and especially, and it's really nice. And I've seen like people like staff or like install it for their family, and it works really well because it's like it's available on mobile phones, and like it works pretty seamlessly. My other option would be like, I really like the Apple solution. Like I think it's like pretty privacy respectful, and I like the fact that it's like hardware baked, and like so that part I actually enjoy. To be fair with other password managers, like there's a lot of them, like I'm in contact with a lot of their staff, and we talk often about like threats and like what can we do as an industry to improve. And I would say like everybody like is pretty dedicated, and so there's no like bad
Yeah.
actor that is. So like if you use one of the major password manager and you like it, then why not, it's
Got it. And is there like overall advice? Do you see like a common mistake people make with their password manager? Or for most of these services, you think just getting on a service and starting to use it is pretty much the main thing to be okay?
yes, I would say like pick one you like and stick with it. It's like this is one of the thing in the industry is like when people choose a password manager, that generally like it becomes part of their daily life because every day you log in into something. So it's like then it becomes an habit, and and they are pretty emotional about it sometimes when it changes, and so it's like yeah.
Yeah. I do like to use, and this is generally advice I give, only use a password manager that makes it easy to leave because you never know what's going to happen. And I like password managers that allow easy exports
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And I actually wanted to ask, maybe there's something I'm missing, but without naming names, there's a few password managers that have TOTP built in, but they
Hmm.
never let you view the seeds
Yes.
of it. And that's even in their dedicated TOTP apps. And I view this as a consumer as anti-consumer, because that means I never actually own the seed to the TOTP code, and I can't ever take it to another service, and they don't let you see it again, and you have to reset it for every service. Devil's advocate, is there a reason they might do that that actually is advantageous to the user?
It's more like obfuscation than like really hiding it. So they are not providing you the features to see it, but like in practice you can. Like if they have a web-based interface, you just open the code and and you will find the actual seed, you know, because they use it for generating these numbers. So it's definitely there.
Okay, but why hide it?
Why hide it? I don't know. I don't know which one you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I know.
So,
I'm not
like,
like I'm asking mainly to see if there is like something I'm missing here, and maybe there's like a valid security reason. Because I think you're I recorded an interview already with someone who's developing a password manager that's very consumer oriented. But like these are kind of my first password manager interviews, and so I also have just like these lingering questions I've had over the years that I'm kind of asking.
yes.
So
No, that's cool. Then I can't think of any security reason why you would do this. Like, for example, like people sometimes they ask us, can we insert in a page a password and make sure that there is no way for the user to see it? And I'm like, see it where? You know, like there is an HTTP request. The server on the other side is gonna see that thing in clear text. There's no way for me to like hide it from like everybody but the destination server. is not possible. Like you could do this with a proxy that replaces it with something else, but then it's not like end to end. It's like it's different kind of service.
interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, are there any kind of final things you wanted to mention to people listening, whether they're an organization or a regular person, before we kind of log off?
No specific specific things. I'm just like yeah. If you are interested about like how password manager works, one of the things I invite you is have a look at their white papers. So, for example, you have some of these questions and like. Some white papers are pretty well written and they will give you like how it works under the hood, like, and it's often an interesting read. So I would say like if you're interested in password manager, like definitely go into that.
Great. And how can people find you and find Passbolt?
You can just go online like www.passbolt.com and like we're also on like social media as well. Like we're on Mastodon and yeah, Blue Sky, I think.
Great. I'll leave links down in the description, and I want to thank you for your time, Remy. And I know I learned quite a few things today, and
I'm glad I could like clarify some things. It's great.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that is the interview. I want to thank Remy for coming on Techlore Talks, and I want to thank all of you for learning a little bit more about how to protect yourself out in this crazy world that is always seems like it's trying to get you. If you enjoy these podcasts and you want to see more of them and you want this podcast to keep growing with time, consider leaving a rating if you're on a platform that allows that. You can also support Techlore directly for free by just using one of our affiliate links. We have a support page down below that details how to do this, or we also have paid support methods if you just want to directly contribute to the mission. I want to thank you all for listening, and I'll see you all next time on Techlore Talks.